So we're going to look at the journey of immigrants. What happens? Now, one important point. The category of people I have worked with are professionals. I will define that as people who need at least a college or university degree to do their job. The reason I mention this is I've done workshops, for example, in Lloydminster like this, and people were asking me like, well, what happens, or in Fort McMurray, what happens with people who have kind of high school diplomas kind of level? And I have no insight in that. I cannot help you in any way because I have not worked with people like that. When the city of Toronto sent me people to work with one-on-one, they were all like, at least bachelor and 15 years of experience. So like butcher, for example, I remember one person was asking me, I don't know. Okay? It's not that I don't want to know, it's I don't have the experience. The other thing is I'm going to focus on primarily skilled immigrants. I think, number one, that's the biggest category. The other thing is a number of people may have come as refugees, but to me what matters is do they have a high level of education or not? If they came as refugees but have a bachelor's, same, like as my daughter would say, same difference, they still fall in the professional category. I say this because I don't know whether, like many people, I didn't ask them, like, did you come as a skilled immigrant or refugee? It was not material to me. So I will focus on the skilled immigrant category because that's the one I've worked the most. So we're going to look at progress versus time. Time is obvious. Progress, the way I will define it is whichever way you measure your progress in life. There's many different ways of measuring progress, right? Some people will measure it by money. I'm sure you've all heard the expression net worth. That's one measure of progress. Other people might measure it by title. Some people will measure it by the kind of car they drive. That's a common one in the UK, for example. Yeah? I don't know if you know, like, for example, there's 4 luxury car brands coming from the UK. It's not an accident, okay? Like people in the UK really like to drive those cars. And one of the ways they'll tell you how successful somebody is by the kind of car they drive. I remember when one of my British friends said that he was talking about somebody who kind of had a big promotion and he went from having a used BMW to a brand new Mercedes. That was clearly a big progress in his life. Yeah. Some people measure it by the square footage of their house. I'm sure you've all heard that. Yeah. If you're a professor in university, how would you measure your progress? Brent?
Or different designations.
Yeah, so tenure in particular will be a major step. Also the number of publications. How much money do you get for your research? Like the grants you obtain, the number of students you graduate, the awards you get at conferences, the evaluations you might get from your students for your courses. All these will be typical measures of progress for professors. If you're in the army, how would you measure your progress? Rank is an obvious one, okay? Yeah. Medals. Staying alive in wartime. Very important, okay? Well, how do Air Force fighter pilots measure their progress in wartime? Anyone? Kills. Yeah, they'll call it kills, okay? How many enemy planes did you shoot down? And you become an ace when you've shot down 5 or more. Yeah. I hope nobody in this room is measuring their progress in life by kills. You're probably in the wrong job otherwise. Okay? But I think you understand the point I'm trying to make. Okay? Everybody has a way of measuring their progress in life. And all immigrants do. There's many different ways, so it will differ from person to person, but we all have a way of measuring our progress. So what happens to many people? Well, back home, things were moving along and would have continued to move along if we had stayed in our home country. Now, I'm drawing it as a straight line that's going up. It is not always a straight line. It is not always going up. Okay? Like if you think of Venezuela, a number of people are going down these days. If you think there are recessions in China, and people lose their job in India, it's not always a straight line. It's not always going up. But the very important point is, in your home country, you know where you are. You know if you're making progress or not. That's very obvious. Let's say the point where the line goes from solid to dotted is the point where this person has packed everything, got on the flight, and arrived at the airport in Calgary with, all the suitcases and the family in tow. At that moment, does that person feel I'm going up, down, or sideways? Down. I think you all know that, particularly if we arrive in January. Right? I mean, you arrive in the middle of winter and from the Philippines, oh my God, what did I get myself into? Even if you don't arrive in January, it doesn't take long for people to start feeling, oh my God, what did I get myself into? One of the steps that often contributes to that down is failing the driving test.
Yes.
I'm sure many of you know, the vast majority of us fail the driving test when we arrive, even though we've been driving for many years back home. So what happens? Well, for many people, people go down. And some people will go down, 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 down to the point where they decide, forget it, we're going home. My experience is very few immigrants go home. Why? Have you ever asked people? I've had clients where I've told them, if I were in your shoes, I would pack everything and go home. Because, we'll talk about situations like that. Why do people not go home? What keeps them here? Yes, go ahead, Coco.
Shame is one of the biggest things.
Shame is a huge one. Because going home means admitting failure publicly. Everybody knows you failed. Okay? It's not just you know. No, everybody knows. So that is really not appealing. What's the other reason that keeps people here? Anyone? My kids. My kids will have a much better future in Canada than back home. And if you put the two reasons together, that is why most people stay. I find that the avoiding shame, public shame, is a bigger driver for men than for women on average. And my kids will have a better future in Canada than back home is a bigger driver for women than for men on average. Okay? But if you put the two together, people stay. And if people stay, I would say the only category of people that I have seen kind of go back in not insignificant numbers is people from the Middle East, particularly the Gulf. I'm talking about the Persian Gulf. Kuwait, Qatar, Dubai, places like that. UAE, exactly. So the family comes here, the kind of wife and kids settle, and the husband goes back home, goes back there to work. Why? He can make enough money there to support himself and the family at the same time. But other than that, most people stay. Among foreign students, the category of students that will tend to go home in significant numbers is Chinese students. Virtually all the others, vast majority will want to stay, in my experience. So if people stay, what happens? Well, eventually they turn the corner. For most people, from a professional perspective, turning the corner means getting your first job. Right? Now, I'm sure you all know, for most immigrants, that first job is not nearly as satisfying as the last job you had back home. That, for most people, there's a significant drop. Now, people may make more money here than there.
That's true.
Okay? I'll take the example, a nanny, live-in nanny is paid more in Toronto than an accountant in the Philippines. So a female accountant in the Philippines can immigrate to Canada, become a live-in nanny in Toronto, and make more dollars. Does she feel she's made progress? No. She definitely feels like this is going back as opposed to forward. Yeah? So people turn the corner, they get a job. Not the kind of job they were hoping for, but they get a job. After that, what happens? Well, I'm going to show it as either or. It is not either or, okay? There's a whole range of things in between. But just to simplify life, okay, because it gets too messy otherwise. So one category, and I'm sure all of you know people like that, it's this. It's the engineer who's become a cab driver and will remain a cab driver for the remainder of his or her career. It's the medical doctor who's cleaning hospitals. It's the pharmacist who's delivering pizza. It's people who fundamentally got a survival job and got stuck in that survival job. And I'm sure everybody in this room knows people like that. Other people will do this. What do I mean by that? Well, they're smart. They learn the system and they combine it with what they knew back home, and they create a whole that is greater than the sum of the parts. And at some point, they cross the dotted line. What does crossing the dotted line mean? Success. You have more in life of what matters to you than you would have had if you had stayed home. That is obviously why immigrants come. Nobody comes to break even. What's the point? Right? If people come, they come with the idea they're going to have more of what matters to them in life than if they had stayed there. Otherwise, what's the point? Okay? Now, how do I know what I would have had back home? How do immigrants or foreign students find out what they would have had back home?
Family members.
Yeah, they talk to their family members, their relatives. In particular, I talk to my classmates. Since back home, education is such a big driver of what position you'll end up in, I talked to 5 classmates, I averaged that out, I figure I would have had something like that, and that's the way I know whether I'm above, below, or around there. And for a period of time, most immigrants are below. Now, I'm sure all of you in this room know people like this. Can anybody think of a specific example? Like, can you think of one person in particular that you know who have succeeded in Canada? Anyone? Yes?
I'll just share one of the success stories from my organization.
Yeah.
So she was a vet back home, a European country. Then she came to Canada, and obviously she needed to get a license to work as a vet in Canada. So her first job was actually working as a dog groomer.
Yeah.
Because she didn't have the English language, the employer only allowed her to bathe the pets.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
so despite that, she worked it out, got some funding, because funding was the issue to pay for the licensing.
Yeah.
So she got that, and then she was able to write the exams, pass the exams, and now both her and her husband actually own their own vet clinic. So
Well,
that was
that is a great example. Okay? So if you think of money as a measure of progress, I mean, some people will use that. Among the 100 richest Canadians, close to 30 were born outside of Canada. So it is definitely possible. Okay? I'll give you 2 very simple examples. Magna, do you know the name of that company? Look it up. No, like that. No, they make Magna. No, Magna, M-A-G-N-A, and they make automotive parts. And the company was founded by an Austrian immigrant. He came to Canada, he started in his garage, but now the company has 80,000 employees around the world. His name is Frank Stronach, S-T-R-O-N-E-C-H. Another success story is Shopify. You know Shopify? Who founded Shopify? Do you know? It's an immigrant from Germany. Tobias Lutke, he comes from Germany. He came to Canada. He wanted to sell snowboards online, and he found there was nothing that would work. So he created his own shop, and then he created a company like the Shopify that helps people try to sell things on the internet. Okay?
We have one in Alberta, though.
Okay.
It's Sam Colliers. Colliers' family is from Europe.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Now they own.
So-
They're the family that owns Boardwalk.
Oh, okay.
Biwak. So they started as so when they come here, they're the first, second wave, I think, of the Polish.
Yes.
Polish.
Okay.
Okay, and then they started as a cleaner for cleaners.
Yeah.
Of office, home, residential. Now they own this apartment residential properties all over. So when you say Boardwalk now here in Alberta, they know what is boardwalk.
Okay.
But that is the beginning. It started from an immigrant family. Yeah.
Yeah. So you all know people who have succeeded, okay? And we're using money, but other people have succeeded in different ways. I'll give you a couple of examples. One person I remember meeting at a conference in Victoria, this guy was so his family was originally from India. He had grown up in Uganda, and he grew up at the time when Idi Amin Dada came into power. Has any of you heard of this guy, Idi Amin Dada? He was quite a character, okay? Like he gave himself a title like this long, okay? He was the grand poobah of everything, kind of thing. Anyway, this guy he kicked out all the Indians from Uganda. Well, he gave them a choice. You can stay, but we'll feed you to the crocodiles. So Naz was the name of the guy I met. So Naz and his family, like he was young, like his family left Uganda. He ended up in Victoria. He became a pharmacist. By the time I met Naz, he had retired. So he owned 2 pharmacies. So financially, he was doing all right, nothing like big Bill Gates or any of the people we were mentioning a minute ago, but he was doing all right. But the key thing is he had done so much work in the community that he was given the Order of Canada. So obviously somebody was done very well in Canada, way better than he would have had back home. I know another couple, so they were from Colombia. The lady was a medical doctor in Colombia. He was a civil engineer in Colombia. They came to Canada. She became a paramedic. He became a laborer on construction site. And I remember she said, we've made great progress. Why? Their son had been kidnapped in Colombia. And she said, we paid the ransom. We were lucky we got our son back. But I know it will happen again. And sooner or later, he will not come back. And here in Canada, she says, I know my son will come back. So for her, that was progress. Okay? I remember one guy, he was gay, and I mean, he was visibly gay. What I mean by that is his mannerisms were very feminine. So some people will be in the closet. He was definitely not somebody who could be in the closet because his mannerisms were quite feminine. And he was working as a civil engineer in one of the Latin American countries. And on construction site, he was harassed all the time, okay? Like to the point where it became a safety issue. And so he emigrated to Canada. He got married. For him, life was good. So you understand what I mean, okay? Many people do succeed. Now, some people have asked me what percentage of people succeed versus people who I cannot tell you. First, for 2 reasons. One is I have no idea. The other one is I'm presenting it as either or, but it's not either or. There's all kinds of things in between, so it would be very hard to quantify. But you all know people who have succeeded. And part of success, in many cases, includes redefining progress. Because if you use the measures of progress that are commonly used in hierarchical cultures, remember we said most immigrants come from countries that are significantly more hierarchical than Canada is. What are the common measures of progress used in hierarchical cultures? Titles and the number of people who report to you. And if you see resumes from recent immigrants, you probably have seen this kind of people emphasize their titles and the number of people who report to them. Well, if you're in India or in China, the odds of you managing lots of people and having a higher title are way better than in Canada. Number one, we have a lot fewer people, so you cannot manage as many. The other one is there's far fewer levels in Canadian organizations than there are in Chinese or Indian organizations. So as a result, the odds of you having a higher title are also low. Okay? Just to quantify it, any of you know how many employees there are at Sinopec or PetroChina? PetroChina has 1.7 million employees. Just so, okay, 1.7 million. It's like the entire workforce of Alberta works for one company, more or less. Yeah. So people do succeed. Some people don't. Yeah. Now, one very important question, and this is what brings me to this one, because that's building on what you were saying a minute ago. How long does it take for people to start feeling successful? Meaning, how long does it take to go from the moment you landed physically in Canada to the moment you start feeling successful? How long do you think it takes? Anyone?
Depends.
It does depend,
Yeah.
okay? But the key part to me is this. It's measured in years. So I tell people 6 to 15 years, if you were, which, I mean, we won't quibble. I mean, this is a wide range, obviously. Okay? But it is measured in years. That's the fundamental point. Now, I don't mean that it will take years for immigrants to get their first job. That happens way faster than that. But it takes years to get to the point where you feel that you're doing better in Canada than you would have if you had stayed back home. Everybody with me on that difference, okay? It's not years to get a job, but it is years to feel successful. So, why is it 6 to 15? Well, part of it is the personality, the skills of the individual, obviously. Another one will be how much demand is there for their skills? I mean, it was really striking to me, like, I've been very involved in the oil and gas industry, and I've been very involved with APEGA, like the Association of Engineers. And I remember seeing a lot of civil engineers, like particularly like around 2010, 2012 kind of time frame. I've seen tons of civil engineers who would land in Calgary or Edmonton, and at that time they would get a job within a few weeks because Alberta was short of civil engineers. The same people, if they landed in Toronto, would be unemployed for months because Ontario had way too many civil engineers at the time. So where you landed was a big factor. Okay, how much demand for your skills is there? Okay? Another one will be how easy is it to get in your profession. So we talk about licensing for veterinarians or medical doctors, nurses, and so on. Okay? Those will be all factors that come into play. Now, one question. I don't get that question from immigrants very often, but I get it from Canadians pretty much all the time. So before we get to that, how long does the average immigrant think it's going to take him or her to succeed when they arrive?
A year?
Yeah, it's measured in months. It's measured in months. I have asked people who kind of just arrived, how long do you think it's going to take you to succeed? It's measured in months. 3 months, 6 months, a year. 18 months is the longest kind of thing. Yeah. So what people expect fundamentally is a small drop. Everybody expects a drop. But people underestimate greatly how much of a drop it will be. And they expect a much faster recovery. And the key question now becomes why? I don't get that question from immigrants. I get that question from Canadians. Why do people have such an unrealistic expectation of what life will look like when you get to Canada? So in order to understand that one, obviously, you have to put yourself in the shoes of immigrants when people decide to emigrate. What sources of information do you have at your disposal in order to try and figure out what your life will look like when you get to Canada? Yes?
The information will be coming from the country of destination.
So,
And,
yes?
Yeah. And of course, the internet.
Yes. Actually, the two main sources. So, I mean, part of it will be from the government, but my experience is that's not the biggest part that people will focus on. The two main sources will be the internet, TV, media, whatever, YouTube. The other one is, yes, my friends and relatives who have emigrated to Canada or the US, because for most immigrants, when we're back home, it's the same. We only realize the difference when we arrive. I mean, I know, like, on a regular basis, my relatives will tell me, you're so American. And I tell them, no, I'm so Canadian. And their reaction is no difference. Okay? So, TV, internet, and friends and relatives who have moved to North America and go back on vacation. Who goes back on vacation?
Successful people.
Exactly. These are the ones who can afford it. Okay? Like people who have succeeded will be going home once a year on average. The cab driver, after 20 years, has saved enough money to go home once. That's all he will be able to afford. But when he goes home, how does he behave?
Successful.
Like he's successful. I'm sure you've seen people like that at the airport. They have 3 boxes this big. Okay? And they have gifts for 300 people. Right? You've all seen people like that. Okay? And so people back home, when they see people coming on vacation, what do they see?
Success.
Everybody's successful. Right? The other one is TV, internet, media. Now, think about when we watch movies, what kind of topics, what kind of people do, whose stories are being told by movies?
Success stories.
Success stories quite often. Or people who have very difficult lives. But nobody has ever made a movie about the life of the average accountant. Nobody will ever make that movie because nobody will ever pay to watch that movie. Right? We are not interested in the life of the average person. We know what it's like. We live it. We don't need to go to the movies for that. When we go to the movies, we want to see the lives of unusual people or the lives of usual people in very unusual circumstances. Think of Survivor. Survivor is all average people, but not in average circumstances. And so as a result, what happens is people have a distorted idea of what life will look like when you get there. Now, if you ask can you guess what were the top 3 TV series in terms of global audience between 2000 and 2010? Series, okay, like so Survivor will not be part of that because that's not a series per se kind of thing. Again? Yes, Friends is one. Sex and the City and Baywatch. How well do these TV series represent your life?
Identical.
Right? Baywatch. We run on a beach in a swimsuit all the time in Calgary. Right? So now, if you ask the average immigrant, do you think your life is going to look like Baywatch? People will say no. But how much impact, how much influence do media have on us? They have a way more impact than we realize. Do you know how much a corporation needs to pay to air a 30-second commercial during the Super Bowl?
Millions.
Yeah. 5.6 million is going to be the rate for the next Super Bowl. 30-second commercial, 5.6 million. They do not pay $5.6 million just to be nice. They must get some return on their investment, which means it must influence us. Okay? So part of it is there is a process, and I experienced it not so much when I came to Canada, but when I went to the US, self-selection. What I mean by that is we'll select the information we get. So for me, it kind of took that, here's what it looked like. So I was in France, and I'm going to go do my PhD in California. That's done. Like I've signed on the paper, I know I'm going there. But I still have 3 months. I need to finish my degree, I need to wait for my visa, and so on. During those 3 months, I would meet from time to time French people who have gone to Los Angeles, because that's the city I was going to, and come back. And I would talk to them. And I realized over time that I was selecting the information I was getting. What I mean by that is if a French person who had gone to Los Angeles talked to me about the smog, endless commute, like you can't meet people, whatever, I wouldn't talk to these people very long. But if they were talking to me about sea, sex, and sun, I would talk to them for 2 hours. So I was selecting the information I was getting. Now, part of it is also what information will the government or immigrant consultants put out. Immigrant consultants, let me tell you, talk about this.
Yes.
They don't talk about this,
Yeah.
and they do not talk about that part. They only talk about this. Look at how big the house you'll have in 15 years. Not now, in 15 years. Okay? The government is also part of the equation. Okay? I don't know if it's still the case, but for a long time, the immigration portal of the province of Saskatchewan had no picture of winter. All the pictures were spring, fall, or summer. No winter Saskatchewan. Okay? So obviously, we are part of the equation. We can do a better job. But it is not easy to understand what life will look like because you may not get the right information or you may not be able to put it in context. Because one point I hear all the time from many Canadians when I discuss this is, why don't people do research? Well, people do research, but there's one fundamental limitation to research. You can only research things you know you don't know. You cannot research things you don't know you don't know. So the way I love to illustrate this point is like this. Let's say you decided, for whatever reason, that you want to go to Italy. You like Italian food, you love the Italian lifestyle, you've decided you're going to immigrate to Italy. What would you look up online? Besides how to learn Italian, obviously. But what kind of information would you look up online?
Tourist sites, flights, hotel availability.
Yeah? So that's if you go on vacation. If you're going to live there, you're going to immigrate.
Oh, I'm going to live.
So you would look, sorry?
The job opportunity.
Exactly. What kind of job opportunities?
Cost of living.
Cost of living, okay. Can I get a job? Many of you would probably think of, do I need a license? Or because we're so used to regulatory bodies, we would think of that.
Yeah.
How many of you would think of looking up, can I buy a car in Italy? You wouldn't, because here anybody can buy a car. But it turns out in Italy, only Italian citizens can buy cars in Italy. Yeah. A friend of mine, now I don't know if it's still true, but a friend of mine learned it the hard way. At the time, he was a professor at UBC. He went to Italy on a sabbatical. And so 1 year. This friend of mine, his first name is Mike. Mike is really a car enthusiast. I mean, he raced cars, as is like, when he got his license. He was working on cars even before he got his license. I mean, he can take a car apart and put it back together. And so when he went to Italy, he has his sights set on a shiny red Italian car. Not Ferrari or Lamborghini, that's not in his budget, but he's targeted Alfa Romeo. He's going to get a red shiny Alfa Romeo. He knows what year, what model, how much he should pay, everything. So when he goes there, he starts looking for cars, he finds people. Obviously, his Italian is limited, the English of the people he's talking to is limited, so negotiations are difficult. But everything seems to be moving along smoothly until a particular point. And then at that point, it just completely grinds to a halt. And he doesn't understand why. And that happened several times. And after about 3 weeks, he was just going out of his mind because every time everything's okay until it grinds to a halt. And eventually somebody told him, well, the problem is you're not Italian. We cannot sell it to you. It's not legally possible. And I can tell you, it took him 3 weeks to figure that out. And he was going out of his mind by the time he found out. So this is the point. We cannot research information we don't know. And that is a big challenge. And one big challenge specifically is regulatory bodies. Because there's far more professions that are regulated in Canada than in other countries. Medical doctors, to the best of my knowledge, are regulated around the world. Every country has some form of regulation for medical doctors. But there's a lot of professions where you don't have regulatory bodies. Engineering is a good one. There's like in France, you're an engineer as soon as you have an engineering degree. You don't need a license from a regulatory body. And that is the case in many parts of the world. So when people come to Canada, since in their home country their profession is not regulated, what happens? They don't think of looking it up online. You have no idea what it is about. Okay? So so if you put it all together, between, the internet does not show us the life of the average person. The friends and relatives who come on vacation are the successful ones, or behave like they're successful. The immigration consultants show you the success, not what it takes to get there. The government shows you only summer, spring, and fall, not winter. And we self-select the information, and you can only look information you don't know. Well, put it all together. There's a huge gap between expectation and reality. Now, one question which I have studied, because so as I told you, I've coached many people, either people who were transferred internally, people who were sent on expatriate assignments, immigrants who were sent to me by the city of Toronto. And one question that I really tried to figure out was, what makes the difference between people who go sideways and people who go up? Because for a while, I would coach people. Some people would succeed, some people would not. And I was thinking, well, am I doing something, like what could I do differently in order to increase the percentage of people who succeed, or, what am I doing wrong, kind of thing. So I realized that there were 5 characteristics that really played a huge role in people's success. Number 1, drive. You have to be driven. Now, for most immigrants, if you're the main applicant, the immigration process is complex enough that you did not land in Canada by accident. Same thing with coming as a foreign student. It's complex enough that you did not arrive in Canada by accident. So you have to be driven. Where drive can be more of a challenge is the spouse of the main applicant. The main applicant really wants to go to Canada. The spouse is just following and not really that motivated. And I'm sure you've noticed there can be quite a few divorces among couples like these. Yeah. So drive, for most main applicants, that is not an issue. They have the drive. But drive by itself, I'm sure you've all noticed, is not enough. Drive, in particular, drive without adaptability does not work. What does drive without adaptability look like? Well, I'm sure you've all seen it. It's the person who has created one resume, sent it to 500 places, gets 0 response, and keeps sending the same resume. That is drive without adaptability. And it doesn't work. Another one is a positive attitude. You have to smile. Canadians don't like sour grapes. I tell immigrants, in Canada, you can complain about the weather endlessly. Canadians will join you, no problem. The weather is always bad. It's too hot, too cold, too wet, too windy, too dry. It's bad. It's always bad. Okay? Anything else, don't complain to Canadians about it.
Traffic.
Yeah, traffic you could. Yeah, it's like, but anything else, keep it to yourself or to your spouse. Okay? Because if you start complaining about Canada, how people will react? Why did you come? Yeah. I'm speaking from first-hand experience because coming from Paris, in Paris, people will not smile to strangers. If you ever go to Paris, you'll see that people don't smile to one another. If you smile, well, if you ever go there, try this. Smile to somebody who's of the same gender as you. Because if you smile to somebody from the opposite gender, then it will totally skew the experiment. Okay? But smile to a stranger in the street who's the same gender as you. I promise you, the odds are really high that person will go on the defensive. Yeah, because in France, if you smile to a stranger, it will mean one of 3 things. They will interpret it one of 3 ways. You have a mental disability. You are a con artist who's going to try to get something illegally from me, or you're American. And all three interpretations are negative by French standards. Okay? French people, and if you go to Eastern Europe, that is also true. In many parts of Eastern Europe, if you smile, people look at you like something's wrong with you, kind of thing. Okay? So, I mean, as a workshop facilitator, I had to smile. I had to learn to smile. And I had to smile even in situations when I didn't feel like smiling. I'm sure you can appreciate that. Okay? I did a workshop the day before my wife died. I had to smile. Because I knew that if I didn't smile, I would have two problems instead of one. She's going to die. That is a fact. Like, there's nothing we can do. She's in palliative care. She's been in palliative care for 3 months. There's no question about it. But if I don't smile, I will have also a financial problem. Because I will have no business. So I had to smile. I didn't feel like it, but I had to. Another very important one is a sense of ownership. This is really very important in my experience as well. Because yes, the federal government can improve. The provincial government can improve. The municipal government can improve. Regulatory bodies can improve. Employers can improve. Immigrant servicing agencies can improve. But in the end, it's my problem. I have to find my own solution. And at the lower levels, from an educational perspective, there is a one-size-fits-all solution. Everybody can work at McDonald's. Nothing wrong with working at McDonald's, that's not the point. But most immigrants don't come for that. That's not their goal. Okay? So, at that level, everybody can do it. But if you want, the more education you have, the more complex your work is, the more customized the solution will have to be. The more, so in other words, the more ownership you will have to take. I'm sure you've all seen people, clients who expect the counselor to find them a job. Yeah, exactly. You can create jobs, right? So, and that is a big challenge, because you all know in Canada, nobody can find someone else a job. We can pave the way to the door, but after that, it's over. You have to open the door yourself. So, how can you tell whether somebody owns their problem or not?
They seek.
Where's the, yeah.
They will seek more information, more training, and they will ask ways so that they could be promoted in their jobs.
Yes, okay. There's a very, very simple way I found to find out if people own their problem or not. You ask them, how did you end up here? If they start with the word I, they own their problem. If they start with the word they, whoever they is, they don't own their problem. And it's very, very visible. So we'll come back to that point about ownership, because it's so important in my experience. You need to own your problem, your own career in particular. That is really fundamental. And one more thing that I found very important in determining how successful people are likely to be is, so I call it perspective. I'm not entirely sure whether that's the right word, but fundamentally it is the ability to see the world in shades of gray as opposed to black and white, 0 or 1, right or wrong. If people see the world in binary terms, right or wrong, then it is extremely difficult to manage cultural differences. Because cultural differences are all about the fact that there is more than one way to get the same result. So if people see it as there's one right way, everything else is wrong, that is really challenging in an environment which is culturally different from theirs. Okay? So if you put the two together, all these 5 characteristics together, I find that people who have these characteristics are far more likely to be successful than people who don't. And you'll notice one very important thing. These 5 characteristics apply just as much to Canadians as they do to immigrants. For Canadians to succeed in Canada, they will need also these characteristics. The only thing is they're more likely to understand how the system works, but still they will need drive, they will need adaptability, they will need a positive attitude, they will need to own their own career, and they will need to see the world in shades of gray. And this applies not just, this whole process does not apply just to immigrants. It also applies to anyone who goes through what I will call a life-altering event. So what do I mean by a life-altering event? Any event such that whatever future you had envisioned for yourself is gone instantly. It's not like the probability has decreased. No, it will not happen, period. So what would be examples of events like that? Well, somebody has an illness or an accident, and it leaves them with some form of disability. In Calgary, we had a number of people who experienced something like this in 2015. Their company laid them off, and they did not see it coming at all. I'm sure you've all met people like that. I mean, in Calgary, there were quite a few. Well, I didn't see it coming either. Okay? Like, I mean, well, I will not claim that I foresaw that drop in the price of oil, and it had a huge impact on people. And some people, essentially, so what does it look like? Well, some people get depressed. That's the equivalent of going down, 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 down. Okay? Some people will end up in a job, but they don't feel like they're still bitter. They still, kind of go back, keep talking about how good the past was. And some people learn to change the direction, or they redefine progress, and they go up. One of the most striking example I know of somebody who went through that process, born and raised in Canada, was a guy I met in Abbotsford. I don't remember his name. When I met him, he had reached that point. So what happened was this. He was a mechanic working for the city of Abbotsford. He was doing maintenance on dump trucks. One day, he's doing work on one of the dump trucks. The safety latch was not on properly or something like this. The whole thing fell on him. When he woke up, he was in a hospital, paralyzed from the waist down, with tubes coming out in all kinds of directions. I mean, and he went through the whole process. And I remember, so as I said, when I met him, he was there. He was in a wheelchair. He came to pick me up at the Vancouver airport because I was going to speak in Abbotsford, and he was the one who actually organized all that. And so first of all, when he drove me from Vancouver to Abbotsford, we ended up discussing. That's how I found out he had reached that point. And the other thing is, it was fascinating because I realized he's in a wheelchair and he's driving a van. How is he going to do it? Have you ever tried to think about, how do I drive without my feet? Well, you can't. I mean, cars are meant to be operated with feet. So I asked him, how do you do it? Can I watch? So he showed me how he got into first, how does he get into the car in the first place? Okay? So he opens the door, and then he lifts himself with his hands to get onto the seat. Then he disassembles his wheelchair. So he takes the wheels first, and then he takes the body, the actual seat of the chair. He has a gizmo that he operates with his hand that actually, moves the gas pedal. Okay, he has another gizmo for the brake. It was fascinating. This guy can operate a car with his hands, with no feet. And I remember when we were discussing this, he said, "Yeah, I experienced all that." He said one day his wife told him this. She said, no matter how bad the accident was, and we both wished it didn't happen, you are today a better person than you would have been if you had not had that accident. Because what happened was this. He went through that whole process, and he became an advocate for people with disability in Abbotsford. He became a public speaker. He became the president of the local association. He was doing all kinds of things for people with disabilities, which he was doing all kinds of social activities. He would never have dreamed of doing it if he had been a mechanic. So I'm not wishing that people have accidents. That's not the point. Okay. But you understand the idea. Okay. Some people will essentially rise to a level, because of adversity, will rise to a level that they would never have reached probably if they had not had that accident, illness, or life-altering event. Questions or comments on this? Because I find this is really important. Because usually when, as a counselor, what stage are our clients when we help them? Yeah, they're somewhere here.
Yes.
Okay? And this is the part of life where life is not fun.
Yeah.
And helping people see that there is a future. And we can give you ideas on how to get there. There's plenty of things. Because the good thing is, just like Javier, how do you pronounce your first name again? Javier. Okay, sorry, I was like Javier. So we were discussing about EQ.
Yeah.
Like EQ, you can improve your EQ.
Yep.
You cannot improve your IQ.
Yeah.
That's much harder. But your EQ, you have plenty of things you can do to improve it. Same thing with all these characteristics. You can work on improving them. The hardest one is drive. That one, I don't know to what extent you can modify that. But the others, you can definitely work extensively on them and make progress, in my experience. Here, we're going to talk about ownership. Ownership, I want to expand on that one because it's really, really important in my experience. Now, I'm sure all of you have heard of Stephen Covey, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Mm-hmm. How many of you have read the book or attended the course? You have? Okay. If you haven't read the book or attended the course, I encourage you to read the book. It is a really good book. It didn't sell 10 million copies by accident. In The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Stephen Covey talks about 2 circles. One is the circle of concern, and the other one, he uses kind of interchangeably the word control and influence. I am going to separate the 2 concepts, and so we'll end up with 3 circles. So the first circle will be the circle of control. These are the things you decide. You decide what clothes you're going to wear. That is within your control. Every morning, you decide. Now, if the clothes you were planning on wearing are at the dry cleaner, you cannot wear them that day. But other than that, you decide. The circle of concern will be the things that impact you, but you don't impact them. What impacts us in Alberta?
General economy.
Yeah. In particular, the price of oil. I mean, I tell people in Toronto, if you want to know the mood in Calgary, all you have to do is look at the price of oil and the temperature. That will give you a pretty good estimate of what is the general mood in the city. Okay? When both are down, it's not fun. Okay? And yeah, we cannot influence the price of oil. We have no influence on it. We have no control on it, over it. Okay? We take whatever the market gives us. Same thing with the US economic policy. We cannot influence it. In the middle, I'm going to add the circle of influence. These are things you have an impact, but you may not get what you want. So if you think of kids. When they're very young, you control what they wear. As they get older, you go from control to influence. Mm-hmm. And when they become teenagers, what they wear becomes a concern for you. Right? So you all understand the concept. Okay. Think about another way to look at it is this. As an employee, I can work hard to make sure I keep my job. And, so this way I have a regular income. My impact on the financial situation of my organization, I will have some influence, but I don't have control. And the bigger the organization is, the smaller my influence will be. I mean, I worked for Procter & Gamble. I was 1 employee out of 100,000. Obviously, my influence on the overall results of the company is limited. Now I'm self-employed. I have a company of one. I have way more influence, obviously, but I still don't have control. I mean, I don't choose who decides to, now I have some influence on who becomes my client or not, but I don't have control. Yeah. And then, as we discussed, we have neither control nor influence on the price of oil, the US economic policy, and things like that. Think about people doing their job search. What goes into their circle of control? What goes within their circle of influence? And what goes within their circle of concern? This is a really important element for people to think about. So what do they control during their job search?
The information they put out.
Yes. So in particular, your resume. What is on your resume, you have complete control. Who you send LinkedIn invitations, you have complete control. Which events you try and attend, you register for, you have complete control. And there's one fundamental thing you have control over: your time. It is really critical for the average job seeker, and that applies whether you're immigrant or Canadian, is exactly the same, to make sure you think actively of how you use your time. This came to me when the first time I realized this. I worked with an Egyptian. I think if I remember correctly, he was a medical doctor. So let's call him Mohammed. Mohammed came to me through the city of Toronto, and as a way to kind of break the ice, I met him. It was June 2011, if I remember correctly. It was a few months after the Arab Spring. I think you all remember the Arab Spring. I think it was February 2011 it started. So I met him a few months after that. And things had started to kind of become, there was a lot of things going on in Egypt. So as a way to break the ice, I asked him, what's going on in Egypt? So Mohammed started to give me a complete analysis of all the factions, who's doing what they're after. After 20 minutes, I stopped him and I said, Mohammed, how much time do you spend watching Egyptian TV every day? And he said, probably 4 or 5 hours per day. What's the problem?
He's not learning about the culture that he's in.
Exactly. His body is here, but his mind is there. Yeah. He is focusing on the circle of concern. And one of the points that Stephen Covey makes in his book, and I think it's absolutely right, is the more you focus on your circle of concern, the smaller your influence and control become. These two circles shrink. On the other hand, the more you focus on control and influence, the bigger these circles become. So it is really critical for your clients to focus on two things. One is what information they're putting out, exactly as you said, and how do I use my time? It's a big deal in my experience. A good example is, who do you try to network with? Because I've heard people say, people should network all the time. My experience is that can be very self-defeating for the average immigrant. Why is that? Well, back home, you don't go to people and say, hi, I'm Lionel, in the bus. Okay, it just doesn't work at all. You have to be introduced by someone else. I mean, it's very striking if you take a plane. In the US, you sit down, actually you haven't even sat down, the person next to you starts talking to you. In France, we can spend the whole time crossing the Atlantic without looking at each other. I'm exaggerating, but not that much. Okay? People will not, you have to be introduced to someone else in order to start talking to them. So, for most immigrants, going to a stranger and striking a conversation is a big psychological challenge. So if they try to do it with everybody, what will happen? Well, the odds of them getting into a conversation that is, one, comfortable, and two, actually brings them some information that's useful for their job search is very low. And if you do it with everybody, you'll get no most of the time. You'll get rejection. Does that encourage people to go out of their comfort zone and strike conversations? No, it makes it even harder. So by making sure that you focus on who you try to network with, and we'll come back to that later this afternoon, you can increase the probability of one getting information and making the conversation comfortable. And then as a result, that will encourage you to try more as opposed to do it less. Okay? So control and influence, in my experience, are really essential for people to focus on. All right?